Some photographs don't capture a moment. They sentence a lifetime. Emily Carter would remember those words long after the applause had faded. The grand ballroom of the Windsor Regency Hotel shimmered beneath towering crystal chandeliers, every polished surface reflecting elegance, wealth, and carefully rehearsed smiles. A string quartet performed softly while waiters glided through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Tonight's charity gala was more than another glamorous event. It was the evening Ryan Sullivan had promised would remind the city that success and generosity could exist in the same man. Reporters gathered near the stage, investors exchanged handshakes, and television cameras searched for the perfect image to lead tomorrow's headlines. Emily paused near the entrance, gently smoothing the fabric of her ivory maternity gown. At 8 months pregnant, she moved more carefully than usual, one hand instinctively resting on the life growing inside her. She forced herself to smile. Ryan had insisted she attend despite her exhaustion. "People have been asking about us," he had said that morning. "Tonight will quiet every rumor." She wanted to believe him. There had been too many late-night meetings, too many canceled dinners, too many conversations that ended before they truly began. Yet somewhere beneath the disappointment, Emily still held onto the memory of the man who once stayed awake painting their baby's nursery with his own hands. That version of Ryan felt impossibly distant now. Across the ballroom, Ryan stood surrounded by executives and donors, every inch the accomplished entrepreneur. His tailored midnight blue tuxedo fit perfectly. His calm smile never seemed forced. To everyone watching, he looked like a man completely in control of his world. Then Victoria Hayes entered the room. Confident, elegant, effortlessly graceful. As director of communications, she often accompanied Ryan to public events. But tonight something felt different. Their eyes met across the ballroom before either spoke a word. Emily noticed the change immediately. Ryan's reserved expression softened into something warmer, something she had not seen directed toward her in months. She told herself she was imagining it. The orchestra changed melodies as photographers gathered near the center aisle, preparing for another round of promotional photographs. An event coordinator politely guided several guests into position. Ryan stepped forward. Victoria stood beside him. A photographer called out their names. Ryan turned, smiled, and wrapped one arm comfortably around Victoria's shoulders. Camera flashes erupted in rapid succession, filling the ballroom with bursts of white light. Conversations briefly paused as dozens of eyes followed the spectacle. Emily stopped walking. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the music surrounding her. She waited for Ryan to step away, to look toward her, to realize what those photographs might mean. He never did. Another flash. Another smile. Another perfectly composed pose. The room suddenly felt smaller. The laughter around her became distant, as though heard through water. Someone asked whether she needed a chair. Another guest reached toward her arm, but Emily barely noticed. Her vision blurred. She tried to inhale, yet every breath felt strangely shallow. One final glance crossed the ballroom. Ryan was still facing the cameras. He had not seen her, or perhaps he had chosen not to. The polished marble floor tilted beneath her feet. A champagne glass shattered somewhere nearby. Then everything dissolved into silence. Gasps spread across the ballroom as guests rushed forward. The quartet stopped playing mid-song. Medical personnel who had been stationed near the entrance hurried toward the growing crowd, while photographers slowly lowered their cameras, uncertain whether to continue documenting the evening. Only then did Ryan turn around. His expression shifted from practiced confidence to visible shock as he caught sight of Emily lying motionless beneath the brilliant lights that had moments earlier celebrated another flawless public appearance. Somewhere among the frightened voices, a single camera captured one last photograph before security moved everyone back. It showed a smiling millionaire beside another woman while his pregnant wife collapsed alone. By sunrise, millions would see the image. None of them would know it was only the first page of a story that would eventually cost Ryan Sullivan everything he believed could never be taken away. Emily opened her eyes to a world that sounded quieter than it should have. The steady rhythm of a heart monitor replaced the orchestra she remembered. Soft morning sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, painting pale golden lines across the private hospital room. For several seconds, she could not remember where she was. Then the memories returned, one painful image after another. Crystal chandeliers, Camera flashes. Ryan's arm around Victoria, the marble floor rushing toward her. Her breathing became uneven as she instinctively placed both hands over her stomach. A nurse standing beside the bed noticed immediately and offered a reassuring smile. "Take a slow breath," she said gently. "Your baby is doing well. Both of you are stable." Emily closed her eyes, allowing relief to settle over her racing thoughts. The tiny heartbeat she could not hear was still there. The child she had spent months protecting had survived the frightening night. But when she turned toward the chair beside her bed, relief gave way to another emotion entirely. The chair was empty. No flowers. No overnight bag. No jacket hanging across the backrest. No husband waiting for her to wake. She stared at the untouched chair for several long moments before quietly asking the question she already knew the answer to. "Has Ryan been here?" The nurse hesitated almost imperceptibly before answering. "The hospital has received several calls asking about your condition." Emily understood the careful wording. Calls were not visits. She nodded without speaking again. Outside the room, footsteps echoed through the corridor while doctors began another ordinary morning. Inside, time seemed unwilling to move. Nearly an hour later, a gentle knock interrupted the silence. An elegant older woman stepped inside carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. Emily recognized her after a moment. Margaret Lawson had served on the board of the charity foundation for years and had attended countless fundraising events with Ryan and Emily. Her expression carried genuine concern rather than social obligation. "I'm so glad you're awake," Margaret said softly. She placed the flowers on the windowsill before reaching into her handbag. "One of the nurses asked me to give you this. It was found among your belongings after the gala." She handed Emily a sealed ivory envelope with no name written on the front. Curious, Emily carefully opened it. Inside rested a single folded card. For handwritten words appeared in dark blue ink. "The truth saw everything." No signature. No explanation. Only those 4 words. Emily looked back at Margaret. "Did anyone say who left this?" Margaret slowly shook her head. "No. It was simply tucked beneath your evening shawl before the paramedics departed." Emily read the sentence again. "The truth saw everything." It sounded less like comfort and more like a promise. Before she could ask another question, the television mounted on the opposite wall automatically switched to a morning news broadcast. The charity gala dominated every headline. Reporters praised the record-breaking donations before shifting to footage of the previous evening. Ryan appeared on screen standing outside the hotel shortly after Emily had been transported to the hospital. Calm, well-dressed, perfectly composed. "My wife experienced an unexpected medical emergency," he told reporters. "Our family appreciates everyone's concern and respectfully asks for privacy while she recovers." His voice never trembled. His expression remained measured. To millions watching, he looked like a devoted husband navigating a difficult night with dignity. Emily quietly reached for the remote and muted the television. She was not angry. Not yet. She simply felt an unfamiliar emptiness. Margaret watched her carefully before speaking. Sometimes the loudest stories are the ones people work hardest to control. Emily lowered her eyes toward the anonymous note still resting in her hand. Outside, another beautiful morning had begun. Inside, a question settled quietly into her heart. If the truth had really witnessed everything that happened beneath those glittering chandeliers, then somewhere beyond the hospital walls, someone else had witnessed it too. And perhaps that person had finally decided it was time to speak. The anonymous note stayed on Emily's bedside table long after Margaret had gone home. For simple words, the truth saw everything. They refused to leave her mind. Whoever had written them knew more than they were willing to say. More importantly, they wanted Emily to know she had not imagined the loneliness she felt beneath the ballroom lights. The following afternoon, the hospital corridors grew unusually quiet as visiting hours came to an end. Rain tapped gently against the windows, turning the world outside into blurred shades of gray. Emily had spent hours staring at her phone, wondering whether Ryan would finally call. He never did. Instead, there was a soft knock at the partially open door. A young woman stepped inside wearing a simple navy cardigan and carrying a paper cup of untouched coffee. She looked nervous enough to leave at any second. "Mrs. Sullivan?" she asked quietly. Emily smiled politely. "Please, call me Emily." The woman nodded. "My name is Hannah Brooks. I worked as one of the banquet servers at the gala." Emily gestured toward the chair beside the bed. Is everything all right? Hannah remained standing. Her hands trembled slightly around the paper cup. No, she admitted. That's why I'm here. Silence settled between them before Hannah finally gathered the courage to continue. I saw something before you collapsed. Emily's heartbeat quickened. She had replayed the ballroom in her mind dozens of times, yet every memory ended the same way, with Ryan embracing Victoria while the cameras flashed. Everyone saw that, Emily whispered. Hannah slowly shook her head. Not what happened before. She explained that she had been assigned to serve refreshments near a private reception lounge reserved for senior sponsors and executives. Most guests never entered that hallway, making it unusually quiet despite the celebration only a few steps away. While preparing a tray, Hannah overheard Ryan and Victoria speaking behind a partially opened door. I couldn't hear every word, she admitted honestly. But I remember one sentence because it sounded so strange. Emily waited without interrupting. Hannah looked down before repeating it exactly as she remembered. Once the cameras have it, everything else becomes background. The words hung heavily in the room. Emily frowned. You're certain? Hannah nodded immediately. I remember because I thought they were talking about the charity presentation. She hesitated. Now? I'm not so sure. Emily stared toward the rain-covered window. Ryan had always understood media better than almost anyone. Investors trusted him because he controlled narratives with remarkable precision. But hearing that sentence now, after everything that had happened, gave it an entirely different meaning. Hannah carefully reached into her handbag and removed a folded event program. I almost threw this away, she said. Then I noticed something written inside. On the final page, someone had circled one line in blue ink. Official media photo session, 8:25 p.m. Emily remembered collapsing only moments later. The timing felt impossible to ignore. I don't know if it means anything, Hannah said apologetically. Maybe it's just coincidence. Emily accepted the program with both hands. Sometimes the smallest details matter the most. Hannah exhaled in visible relief. Before leaving, she stopped at the doorway and turned back one final time. There's something else. Emily looked up. After the ambulance left, I saw an older man in a gray business suit pick up a leather portfolio that had fallen near the sponsor lounge. He looked around to make sure no one was watching before he walked away. Did you recognize him? Emily asked. Hannah nodded slowly. I've seen him before at your husband's company headquarters. I don't know his name, but he wasn't a guest. The door closed quietly behind her. Emily remained alone once again, holding the marked event program in one hand and the anonymous note in the other. Neither proved that Ryan had intended to hurt her. Neither answered the questions still filling her heart. Yet together they revealed something she could no longer ignore. Too many moments from that evening seemed carefully arranged to be dismissed as chance. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, an unknown man carrying a forgotten leather portfolio might already possess the missing piece capable of changing everything. 3 days after leaving the hospital, Emily Carter stood outside the Sullivan global headquarters for the first time without feeling like she belonged there. The glass tower rose into a clear autumn sky, reflecting sunlight so brightly that it almost hid the cracks beginning to spread beneath its polished reputation. Employees crossed the marble plaza carrying laptops and coffee cups, unaware that the woman standing quietly near the entrance had once been introduced as the future of the company's founding family. Today, she was simply another visitor. Tucked inside her leather portfolio were the anonymous note, the marked gala program, and a notebook filled with every detail she could remember from that unforgettable evening. None of it proved misconduct. Yet together they formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. Emily had not come to accuse anyone. She had come looking for answers. As she entered the spacious lobby, familiar faces looked up in surprise. Some smiled politely. Others quickly looked away. News of the gala had traveled faster than anyone admitted. A receptionist greeted her warmly before lowering her voice. Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Brooks isn't in the building today. Emily offered a calm smile. I'm not here to see Ryan. The receptionist appeared relieved. Is there someone I can help you find? Emily glanced toward the executive elevators before answering. I'm looking for Daniel Mercer. The name seemed to catch the receptionist off guard. Daniel Mercer had served as Sullivan Global's chief compliance officer for nearly 15 years. He rarely appeared at public events, preferring quiet conference rooms to television interviews. After a brief phone call, the receptionist nodded. Mr. Mercer can spare 15 minutes. Daniel's office overlooked the eastern side of the city. Shelves lined with legal volumes surrounded a large oak desk where stacks of carefully organized files reflected years of disciplined routine. Daniel stood as Emily entered. His silver hair and measured expression made him appear older than his 62 years, yet his eyes carried the alertness of someone accustomed to noticing details others overlooked. "Emily," he said gently, "I'm glad you're recovering." "Thank you." She remained standing rather than accepting the offered chair. "I won't take much of your time." Daniel folded his hands patiently. "What brings you here?" Emily placed the gala program on his desk. The blue circle around the scheduled media session immediately drew his attention. "Do you recognize this?" He studied the page for several moments before quietly nodding. "It's the official event schedule." Was that photo session arranged weeks in advance? Daniel hesitated. Most likely. Or was it changed? The question lingered between them. Daniel slowly leaned back. "Why are you asking?" Emily reached into her portfolio and produced the anonymous note. "Because someone wanted me to know the truth didn't begin when the cameras started flashing." Daniel read the handwritten sentence twice before carefully returning it. His expression remained controlled, but a trace of concern appeared beneath his professional composure. "Emily," he said quietly, "there are conversations inside companies that are meant to protect investors, employees, and public confidence. Sometimes those conversations become difficult to separate from personal lives." "Is that what's happened here?" she asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he opened a desk drawer and removed a slim gray folder without placing it in front of her. There was an internal scheduling revision made the morning of the gala. Emily's heartbeat quickened. "Who authorized it?" Daniel met her eyes. "I can't answer that today." "Because you don't know?" "Because I do." Silence filled the office. Outside the window, helicopters drifted slowly across the skyline, while afternoon traffic flowed through the streets far below. Finally, Daniel spoke again. "If you're searching for revenge, I can't help you." Emily shook her head. "I'm searching for honesty." For the first time since she entered, Daniel's guarded expression softened. "Then you're asking the right question." He closed the gray folder and slid a small business card across the desk instead. On the back, he had written a single address by hand. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "An independent records archive on Harbor Street. Ask for Eleanor Price. She keeps copies of documents most people assume disappeared years ago." Emily looked at the handwritten address, sensing another door quietly opening before her. As she thanked Daniel and walked toward the elevator, neither of them noticed the security camera mounted above the hallway. In another office several floors away, someone else was already watching the recording of their meeting and making a phone call before the elevator doors had even closed. The address Daniel Mercer had written on the back of his business card led Emily to one of the oldest buildings on Harbor Street. Unlike the sleek towers that define the financial district, this brick warehouse had survived nearly a century of changing skylines. Its weathered stone entrance carried a bronze plaque that simply read, "Harbor Records Archive." No advertisements, no company logos, only quiet permanence. Emily stepped inside, where the scent of paper, polished wood, and old leather replaced the sterile atmosphere of hospitals and corporate offices. Shelves stretched toward the ceiling, filled with carefully preserved files documenting decades of business transactions, legal agreements, and public records. Behind a large oak reception desk sat a woman in her late 60s with silver hair gathered neatly into a low bun. She looked up before Emily could introduce herself. "You must be Mrs. Carter," she said with a gentle smile. Daniel called ahead. Emily nodded. "You must be Eleanor Price." Eleanor stood and extended her hand. "Please come with me." They walked through narrow aisles until they reached a quiet research room illuminated by tall windows overlooking the harbor. A single gray archive box rested on the center table. Eleanor placed both hands on its lid without opening it. "Everything inside belongs to the company," she explained. "Legally, I cannot release confidential records." Emily's expression remained calm. "I understand." Eleanor studied her for a long moment before adding, "But I can tell you where to look when the records become public." She lifted the lid. Inside were neatly labeled folders containing board schedules, event planning memoranda, and historical governance documents. Emily noticed that every folder was organized with remarkable precision. Eleanor removed one file and opened it to a page covered with approval signatures. Corporate events of this size require multiple authorizations, she explained. Security, communications, legal, executive operations. Emily followed the signatures carefully. Most names meant little to her until she reached one she recognized immediately. Victoria Hayes. Her signature appeared beside a handwritten revision dated the morning of the gala. What changed? Emily asked quietly. Eleanor folded the document closed. I cannot discuss the contents. Emily nodded, disappointed but understanding the limitation. Eleanor offered a reassuring smile. Sometimes knowing that a change existed is as important as knowing what changed. Before Emily could respond, footsteps echoed beyond the research room. A middle-aged man carrying several storage boxes paused when he noticed the visitors. Eleanor introduced him simply as Michael Reed, a records technician who had worked there for nearly 20 years. Michael politely excused himself before disappearing into another aisle. Eleanor watched him leave before lowering her voice. Michael volunteered at the charity gala. Emily looked up immediately. Was he working there? He supervised equipment deliveries behind the ballroom. Eleanor hesitated. He mentioned something unusual after the event. Minutes later, Michael returned, this time carrying an old binder rather than storage boxes. He placed it carefully on the table. I wasn't sure whether I should say anything, he admitted. But after everything that's happened, he opened the binder to a floor diagram of the hotel ballroom. This is the original equipment layout. Emily leaned closer. Several locations had been marked in pencil. Camera positions, lighting rigs, sponsor displays. Michael pointed toward one section near the stage. These cameras weren't originally supposed to face the sponsor entrance. Emily frowned. They were moved? Late that afternoon. By whose request? Michael slowly shook his head. The instruction came through the event coordinator. I never learned who approved it. Emily stared at the revised camera positions. According to the diagram, every photographer would have been facing the exact location where Ryan and Victoria embraced only minutes before she collapsed. Coincidence suddenly seemed much harder to believe. As Eleanor carefully returned the documents to the archive box, she spoke almost to herself. Businesses protect reputations. Records protect history. Emily quietly closed the binder. She still possessed no evidence proving deliberate cruelty. Only an expanding collection of carefully documented decisions that seemed increasingly connected. Before leaving, Michael stopped her near the exit. One more thing, he said. The security company that handled the gala keeps backup recordings longer than the hotel does. If anyone still has untouched footage from that night, it would probably be them. Emily thanked him and stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. Across the street, reflected faintly in the archive's front window, a black luxury sedan remained parked with its engine running. She could not see the driver's face, but as she walked toward her own car, the sedan pulled quietly into traffic, maintaining a careful distance behind her, as though someone had decided that finding the truth had suddenly become a journey worth watching. The hardest truths are rarely hidden. They are simply ignored until someone refuses to look away. Emily repeated the sentence silently as she parked across from the headquarters of Sentinel Event Security, the company Michael Reed had mentioned the previous afternoon. The building was modest compared to Sullivan Global's gleaming tower, but its reputation rested on something far more valuable than polished glass. It protected evidence. Inside the reception area, rows of surveillance monitors displayed office corridors, parking lots, and loading docks from dozens of active clients. A receptionist greeted Emily politely before asking her to wait. 10 minutes later, a tall man with salt and pepper hair entered the lobby carrying a digital tablet. Mrs. Carter? He asked. I'm Thomas Green, Director of Operations. Emily stood and shook his hand. Thank you for seeing me. Thomas led her into a conference room where the walls were lined with framed certifications rather than corporate awards. After hearing her explain why she had come, he folded his hands carefully. Our company stores encrypted backup footage for a limited period, he explained. However, those recordings belong to our clients. We cannot release them without authorization or a legal request. Emily expected that answer. I'm not asking you to violate your contract. Thomas studied her expression. Then what are you asking? She placed the event program, the anonymous note, and a copy of the ballroom diagram on the table between them. I only need to know whether the recordings still exist. Thomas glanced at the documents before looking back at her. Yes, he answered honestly. They do. Emily felt both relief and frustration. The evidence might still be preserved, but it remained beyond her reach. Before she could thank him and leave, Thomas added quietly, "There's something else you should know." He unlocked his tablet and opened a maintenance log. Our technicians documented every camera adjustment made during the gala. Most were routine. His finger paused over one entry. One wasn't. Emily leaned forward. What happened? A camera covering the sponsor entrance was repositioned approximately 18 degrees at 7:42 p.m. Why? Thomas shook his head. The work order simply states, Executive Media Optimization. No individual is identified. Emily immediately remembered Michael's floor diagram. The revised camera position had pointed directly toward the location where Ryan and Victoria embraced. Two independent records now described the same unusual change. Coincidence was becoming increasingly difficult to defend. Thomas locked the tablet again. Without a subpoena, I can't show you the footage itself. Emily nodded. I understand. As she gathered her papers, Thomas reached into a desk drawer and removed a business envelope. Yesterday afternoon, someone delivered this to our office asking that it be given to you if you ever came here. Emily frowned. Did they leave a name? No. Inside the envelope was a small flash drive with a handwritten label that read only. Lobby camera, 6:58 p.m. Her pulse quickened. Is this from your system? Thomas examined it carefully before answering. No. Our equipment uses encrypted storage. This came from a consumer camera. Emily turned the flash drive over in her hand. Someone else had been recording that evening. Someone who had chosen not to remain silent. May I use one of your computers? She asked. Minutes later, the flash drive loaded onto an isolated workstation. Grainy video appeared on the monitor, showing the hotel's main lobby nearly 90 minutes before the gala reached its climax. Guests drifted through the entrance while staff prepared final decorations. Then the recording captured Ryan walking into the lobby with Victoria beside him. They stopped near a decorative fountain, believing no one was paying attention. The video contained no audio, yet their body language told a story of familiarity impossible to dismiss. Ryan gently adjusted Victoria's evening shawl before smiling in a way Emily had not seen for months. It was an intimate gesture, quiet and unguarded. Nothing illegal, nothing scandalous by itself. But it directly contradicted the public narrative that they had merely shared a spontaneous congratulatory embrace during the gala. Thomas watched the silent footage without comment. Context matters, he finally said. Emily nodded slowly. Yes, and sometimes context changes everything. As she copied the file onto a secure drive, her phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number. There were only 8 words. The board has scheduled an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Emily stared at the screen, realizing the quiet search for answers was no longer happening in the shadows. Somewhere inside Sullivan Global, the first cracks had begun to spread through the polished image Ryan had spent years building. And this time, cameras alone would not be enough to control the story. By 8:30 the next morning, Sullivan Global's executive boardroom had become the quietest place in the entire building. Silence carried a different weight when millions of dollars depended on it. Outside, financial reporters gathered behind security barriers after rumors of an emergency board meeting spread through the business district. Inside, 12 directors reviewed confidential briefing folders while muted television screens displayed headlines questioning the company's recent public image. Ryan Sullivan entered precisely on time. His tailored charcoal suit, calm expression, and measured stride projected the confidence investors had trusted for years. He greeted the board with practiced composure, but something felt different. Several directors acknowledged him with polite nods instead of familiar smiles. At the far end of the polished walnut table sat Daniel Mercer. His gray folder remained closed. He had spoken very little since the meeting began. Across town, Emily waited inside a quiet law office overlooking the river. She had accepted an invitation from attorney Claire Whitmore, a respected specialist in corporate governance whose name Daniel had mentioned only briefly the previous evening. Claire placed 2 cups of coffee on the conference table before opening a slim legal notebook. I'm not here to encourage litigation, Claire said calmly. I'm here to help you understand what your options become if evidence continues to surface. Emily nodded. I'm still hoping the truth speaks before lawyers have to. Claire offered a faint smile. Sometimes it does. A knock interrupted their conversation. Thomas Green entered carrying a sealed evidence envelope. I thought you should have this before anyone else hears about it, he explained. Emily looked at him in surprise. I thought your company couldn't release client material. We can't, Thomas replied. This isn't client footage. He carefully removed a printed maintenance report bearing Sentinel's official letterhead. Every technical adjustment made during the gala had been documented by time, location, and employee identification number. One line had been highlighted. Camera position adjustment approved by external event coordinator. Claire studied the document carefully. Interesting. Emily frowned. Why? Claire pointed toward the approval section. Someone authorized a camera change without using the client's internal authorization process. Is that unusual? Very. Claire closed the folder. It means someone outside normal corporate procedures influenced how the event would be recorded. Before anyone spoke again, Emily's phone vibrated. An unknown email had arrived with no message attached. Only a single digital file titled Guest Arrival _original. MP4. Thomas immediately connected Emily's laptop to an isolated monitor. The video began playing. Unlike the previous recording, this footage came from a fixed overhead camera positioned near the hotel's main entrance. Timestamps appeared clearly across the screen. At 6:57 p.m., Ryan and Victoria entered together. At 6:58, they paused near the fountain. At 7:01, Ryan checked his watch before pointing toward the ballroom entrance. At 7:03, an event coordinator approached carrying a clipboard. The coordinator spoke briefly with Ryan before making a phone call and walking away quickly. Nothing in the recording proved conspiracy, yet the sequence established something undeniable. The conversation occurred nearly 40 minutes before the camera adjustment documented in Sentinel's maintenance report. Claire paused the video. Timing matters. Emily stared silently at the frozen image of Ryan speaking with the coordinator. Can this establish intent? Claire answered honestly. Not by itself. Thomas nodded in agreement. But combined with every other record you've collected, it creates a timeline. Across the city, the emergency board meeting reached an unexpected turning point. One independent director quietly slid a newspaper across the conference table toward Ryan. The front page displayed the now famous photograph from the gala beside a new headline. Questions grow over event management decisions. Ryan's expression remained controlled, but his eyes lingered on the article longer than anyone expected. Daniel Mercer finally opened the gray folder he had carried for days. Before we continue discussing quarterly performance, he said evenly, the board should review several procedural irregularities connected to last week's charity event. Around the table, conversation stopped instantly. Ryan slowly turned toward Daniel. For the first time since the gala, genuine uncertainty crossed his face. Back inside Claire Whitmore's office, Emily looked out across the river as sunlight reflected from the water below. She realized something important had changed. Until now, she had been searching for pieces of the truth. Now the truth had begun assembling itself without her. And once a timeline starts telling its own story, even the most carefully managed reputation can no longer decide how the ending will be written. The courthouse looked different before sunrise. Without reporters crowding its front steps, it resembled what it had always been intended to be, a place built for facts rather than headlines. Emily stood across the street holding a folder that had grown heavier with every passing day. Inside were the anonymous note, the maintenance records, the ballroom diagram, the guest arrival video, and the carefully reconstructed timeline. None of the documents alone could decide anyone's future. Together, however, they raised questions that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Beside her, Claire Whitmore adjusted the strap of her briefcase. Whatever happens today, she said quietly, remember why you started looking. Emily nodded. Not for revenge. Claire smiled faintly. Exactly. Across town, Sullivan Global's emergency board meeting had stretched into its third hour. Directors who had once focused exclusively on quarterly earnings were now reviewing compliance reports, event authorizations, and communications logs. Daniel Mercer remained calm as he answered every question with measured precision. Ryan Sullivan, however, found himself responding more often than leading. Confidence had not disappeared from his voice, but certainty had. Every new document narrowed the space between explanation and accountability. At precisely 9 o'clock, Claire's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen before handing it to Emily. A short message from Daniel Mercer read, "The board has voted to appoint an independent review committee. Effective immediately, Ryan Sullivan has been placed on temporary administrative leave pending the outcome." Emily read the message twice. She felt no satisfaction, only silence. A week earlier, she had believed she was fighting to prove that her pain mattered. Now institutions were beginning to ask the same questions without her asking them to. Later that afternoon, Claire arranged a meeting with representatives from the review committee inside a neutral conference facility. No television cameras, no public statements, just a long polished table and people whose responsibility was to understand facts before forming conclusions. Emily presented each document in chronological order. She avoided speculation. She did not accuse Ryan of crimes she could not prove. She simply described what she had experienced and how each independent record connected to the next. The committee members listened carefully, asking precise questions about dates, locations, and conversations. When the guest arrival video played, no one interrupted. When the maintenance report was compared with the ballroom camera diagram, several members quietly exchanged notes. Finally, the committee chair, retired Judge Eleanor Watkins, folded her hands. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "your testimony has been remarkably restrained." Emily looked surprised. "I only told you what I know." Judge Watkins nodded. "That is precisely why it carries weight." As the meeting concluded, Thomas Green entered unexpectedly with another sealed envelope. "Our legal department completed an internal audit this morning," he explained. "We discovered one additional document that is no longer restricted. Inside was a chain of custody report confirming the exact times each surveillance system had been adjusted and by whom. The report did not identify Ryan as ordering any camera movement. Instead, it confirmed something equally significant. Every change had been requested through a communications office supervised by Victoria Hayes during the event. Claire slowly looked up from the report. "That changes the direction of several important questions." Emily remained quiet. She had spent days believing Ryan controlled every decision. Now the evidence suggested a more complicated picture. Responsibility might extend beyond a single person. As evenings settled over the city, financial news channels interrupted regular programming with a brief announcement. Sullivan Global issued a public statement confirming the formation of an independent review committee and Ryan Sullivan's temporary leave of absence. The company emphasized its commitment to transparency and corporate governance. Reporters immediately began debating what the announcement meant for investors, leadership, and public trust. Emily watched the broadcast from her apartment before quietly turning off the television. She walked to the nursery that had remained untouched since the gala. Soft afternoon light filled the room as she rested one hand gently against the crib waiting to be assembled. Her child would someday ask difficult questions about courage, honesty, and forgiveness. Emily realized she already knew her answer. Courage was not shouting louder than everyone else. Sometimes courage meant remaining patient while the truth learned how to speak in its own voice. And somewhere inside Sullivan Global, behind polished boardroom doors and carefully written public statements, that voice had finally become impossible to silence. In the end, people are remembered less for the fortunes they build than for the choices they make when no one is supposed to be watching. The words echoed through Emily's mind as she entered the final hearing room of Sullivan Global's Independent Review Committee. Nearly 3 weeks had passed since the charity gala that had changed every life connected to it. Outside, reporters filled the sidewalks, cameras pointed toward every arriving executive. Inside, there were no flashes, no applause, and no carefully rehearsed speeches. Only documents, testimony, and quiet accountability. Ryan Sullivan sat at one end of the long conference table, accompanied by legal counsel. Across from him sat the committee members led by retired Judge Eleanor Watkins. Daniel Mercer occupied a seat near the center, his familiar gray folder now open for the final time. Emily took her place without looking toward Ryan. She had spent countless nights imagining this moment, believing she would feel anger or triumph. Instead, she felt something unexpected: peace. Judge Watkins opened the proceedings with calm professionalism. Our responsibility is not to judge private relationships, she began. Our responsibility is to determine whether decisions made before and during the charity gala compromised corporate governance, public transparency, or fiduciary responsibilities. One by one, the evidence was reviewed. The revised event schedule, the ballroom camera diagram, Sentinel Security's maintenance logs, the guest arrival footage, internal authorization records, communications approvals. Each document fit into the timeline with remarkable consistency. No single page accused anyone of deliberate malice. Together, however, they established that media positioning, event logistics, and public presentation had been altered through irregular procedures that bypassed established governance policies. Ryan listened without interruption. When invited to speak, he rose slowly. His confident public persona had been replaced by quiet exhaustion. "I never instructed anyone to humiliate Emily," he said. "I believed I could separate my personal mistakes from my professional responsibilities. I was wrong." Silence settled over the room. He continued, "Whether through my own decisions or through the decisions I failed to question, I allowed circumstances to develop that damaged people I should have protected, including my wife, our family, our employees, and the company entrusted to me." Emily looked at him for the first time that morning. She searched his face not for excuses, but for sincerity. What she found was neither victory nor defeat. Only a man confronting consequences that could no longer be delegated to someone else. Judge Watkins thanked him before announcing the committee's conclusions. Sullivan Global would adopt sweeping governance reforms. Independent oversight would be expanded. Executive authority over public communications would be restructured. Ryan Sullivan would permanently resign as chief executive officer, and the board would begin an external search for new leadership. The committee emphasized that its findings concerned corporate governance rather than criminal wrongdoing. Accountability, it concluded, sometimes required institutional change more than courtroom punishment. When the meeting adjourned, reporters rushed toward the exits. Ryan quietly gathered a single leather notebook before leaving through a side corridor without speaking to the press. Emily remained behind, organizing her papers. Daniel Mercer approached with a small envelope. "The board asked me to give you this." Inside was a handwritten letter expressing gratitude for her cooperation and acknowledging that her willingness to pursue facts with patience had helped strengthen the company's future. There was no financial settlement enclosed. No dramatic gesture. Only recognition that integrity had mattered. Months later, winter sunlight filled a modest community center overlooking the river. Emily sat near a large window holding her newborn daughter while volunteers organized donations for young families. She had quietly accepted a position leading a charitable foundation dedicated to maternal health and family support. Her life no longer revolved around boardrooms or headlines. It revolved around purpose. Across town, Ryan was occasionally seen entering a small consulting office where he worked far from public attention. His wealth had not disappeared overnight, but the influence he once considered permanent had. Reputation, he finally understood, could not be purchased once trust had been surrendered. Emily gently rocked her daughter as snow began falling beyond the window. The world outside continued exactly as before, busy, impatient, and loud. Yet inside the quiet room, she realized something extraordinary had happened. She had survived betrayal without allowing it to define her. She had pursued truth without surrendering compassion. And she had discovered that losing the life she once imagined had made room for one built on something far stronger than status. Some people lose power. Some lose fortune. Others lose the illusion that success can excuse every choice. But those who protect their dignity, even when everything else seems to collapse, often discover that the greatest victory arrives long after the loudest applause has faded.